Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Elinor Barr, a local writer and historian. Welcome, Elinor.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's so great you could join me today. Thanks so much. So, Elinor, how did you get interested in local history? Give me a little bit of a background in terms of your own journey.
I was a mature student at Lakehead University. When my kids started school, I went to university, which I didn't have a chance to do when I was young. And I think it was good to be a mature student because I noticed things. There were no histories written about the Thunder Bay area, entire northwestern Ontario at that time. I was flabbergasted. How could this happen? We have just as interesting a history as they do in southern Ontario.
Right.
What was wrong? So my mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Arthur, steered me towards local history, and I was a willing person to do so. So I started, my childhood friend and I started writing our hometown history, Ignace, Ontario.
So you were born in Ignace?
I was born in Fort William, but that was just for the birth.
Right.
And she was my next door neighbor, and she was a member of Canadian Authors Association. And so she had the literary side of it, and I had the history side of it. And we did a very good job. The history of Ignace, a saga of the Shield, is still the best, in my opinion, local history for northwestern Ontario.
And what year did you do that?
1979 it was published.
1979. And so that was your first work of local history,
Yes, the first book.
focusing on your hometown of Ignace.
Yes, and nobody else could have written because I know what I knew and Betty knew what to avoid.
Yeah, you don't want to actually include everything in our history, do we?
Well, no, it can still be interesting and still be factual without telling people secrets. That they should remain secret.
And we've got with us a model of the White Otter Castle, which is also in that neighborhood. So when did you start looking at the history of White Otter Castle?
Well, it started quite early. My dad actually found Jimmy's body and buried it in 1919.
No kidding.
And he told me about, he had a tourist business. And Cyril Graver, an Ignace resident, used to be the guide for tourists that wanted to visit the castle. 18 portages, 30 miles as the crow flies to get to this magic place.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And this is back in what, the 20s and 30s, or?
Oh, yes, it was the 20s and 30s and yes, 20s and 30s.
My goodness.
And people who went there, it was a destination, so they wrote their names on the wall with a pencil, whatever they had brought with them.
Steve was here.
Yes. No, usually they wrote their first and second names and their address where they came from. So there was a lot of American names. And of course, the boys I went to school with, that was a sign of maturity to have made this voyage. And they would climb the tower and lean over and write their names on the wall.
All right.
Inside, yeah. So when the castle was restored, the people who were in charge decided that this was graffiti. I saw it as a hotel register.
Right.
They saw it as graffiti, and they replaced the logs that had to be replaced without making any record of this hotel register, and that offended me.
And when was the castle restored? What time period are we looking at there?
The 90s.
1990s.
It was, they did sort of a patchwork job in the 50s. The castle was in a timber limit, so Jimmy couldn't get title to the property, even though he had it surveyed. He had a surveyor come from Kenora. And even though he sent an application to the provincial government and they accepted his deposit, he still couldn't get it because it was in a timber limit. And so, where were we?
So Jimmy, when did he start the work building on the castle? So this would have been when he was trying to get his legal title, I guess, as well.
Yeah, it was around 1913, 1912, 1913.
So this is the last stage of his life when he was building.
This is when he was building it. He finished it in 1914, and the request, the correspondence was probably 16 or 17. He was very disappointed. At that time, to get permit, land permit, title to your property, you had to build a house and have so many acres under cultivation. He planted sweet williams, 5 acres of them.
So he was surrounded by flowers.
Yes, and that's Lou Callis, the man who made this model, made sure there were plenty of flowers around.
So there's a lot of kind of mythology around Jimmy and the castle that you found that it wasn't 100% accurate.
Well, when I heard that there was a program on CBC radio that this man had found Jimmy and buried his body, I knew that wasn't so. And that was the first clue. But the mythology just grew, even the spelling of his name. And for purposes only known to themselves, Atikokan laid claim to the castle because of Brown's Clearwater West Lodge, which transported people back and forth to the castle. It was not a long journey. It wasn't 18 portages.
Right.
But Jimmy used Ignace for his mail, and he traveled to Ignace to get his mail. He traveled to Ignace to mail his application to the government, and back and forth several times to see if they'd answer him. And then he sent pictures, and I found them in the archives. They were put on a staple, you know, how they did in the government. Everything went on onto a peg.
Yes.
And they have the holes in them. That was so funny. I thought that was a hoot. But the fact is, they saved them, and that was wonderful too.
So we're going to take a little break right now. We're just talking about the White Otter Castle, one of our historic sites here in Northwest Ontario. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.